It starts with a rhythmic tap. It ends when your joints go snap. That is the nature and danger of the skin dancer. Nobody knows where they came from, only that they have always been there. First through town rumors, and then hushed voices, and finally only through the lens of the certified insane. I myself once heard the enticing thralls of a skin dancer outside of my study window. I dared not look upon it. Instead, sending out my manservant Manfred to investigate. He did not return. I took it upon myself then to board up my home and ignore all contact for 6 months. It was lonely, but I think that I starved the bugger out. Never again will I live near any godforsaken forests or woodland areas. Too many bugs, and far too many things I don't fully understand yet. Skin dancers are the worst kind of creature. One that preys on children. If you see something dancing in the woods, for the love of whatever deity or elder one you worship, vacate where you live and never return. It owns that home now. Compendium owner, Madam Nellie, Nell Lockwood. It was always hard for my wife and I to see our daughter's attempts to communicate always ended frustration and tears. Camille had been born with alilia, a form of speech delay that the experts assured us she would grow out of as she got older. But there we were, 7 years later, and unable to even hear how our daughter's day went without it turning into slammed doors. I can't begin to tell you how many times I convinced myself that it was somehow my fault that my DNA was what had corrupted our daughter. My wife Teresa took it harder. Unable to communicate with her own child, fractured her badly, leading to her spending the daylight hours drinking, and her evenings pacing the hallways trying to figure out methods for Camille to converse, failing to understand that support was needed more than constant solutions. I had done everything in my power to make my family more comfortable in those formative years of Camille's life. I moved us across the country when Camille was in first grade. Because her school was ill-equipped for somebody who was mute and she was unable to make friends. I enrolled her in a specialist school to help bolster her skills and even change jobs to accommodate her schedule more easily. Our new home was situated in a beautiful area in Killington, Vermont, that had a sprawling backyard which at the end was connected to the woods. Camille loved adventuring and exploring, so I hoped this would bring her out of her shell. Deep down, I just wanted her to know in any way possible that I was doing the best for her as her father. Camille, to her credit, was a bright young girl that could be perceptible beyond her years, and in time would utilize her intellect to communicate with us through sign language in her journal. I took to the ALS lessons quickly, but my wife struggled to pick it up, and would ultimately dismiss the practice entirely, opting to put her faith and prayer in what she called church therapy, convinced that the Lord was testing her faith by putting her and Camille through suffering. This would result in more than one occasion where I came home to find her standing over Camille, shouting about the devil withholding her vocal cords, and that drastic measures needed to be taken. When she began to shake and obviously frighten Camille, while screaming at the devil was inside of her, I knew that no amount of conversation was going to get through to her, and so I filed for a divorce. My wife tried to fight it, but thanks to the Nest Cam footage of her exercising our daughter, I was granted full custody. It was tough but necessary. Teresa moved out shortly, assuring Camille that she would see her again soon, with an assured wink before giving me a cold stare and slamming the door. I stood there for a moment as I watched the woman that I loved leaving our home in Killington and the life that we had built, before I felt a small tug on my sleeve as Camille stared up at me, her auburn hair tied up in space buns and her big blue eyes piercing my soul. I felt myself welling up, but I sat down with her and I began signing. "Mom and I have to take some time apart, baby." I slowly signed. Nowhere near the skill level I needed to be for a conversation like this, but I had no choice. Camille stared at me for a moment, processing the situation and obviously trying to formulate the words in her mind carefully. "This is my fault, isn't it?" She slowly signed, her hands shaking ever so slightly. "If I wasn't like this, we would be..." "No," I signed back, also vocalizing it silently so she could see the firmness in my statement. "You were perfect just the way you are. This is Mommy's issue to deal with, not yours. I promise." I believed it too. After a year and a half of learning ASL, this was just a natural part of my life, and anything that allowed me to get into Camille's world was worth any sacrifice. Teresa's frustration and pain were understandable, but these faith healings were not the way to go. "Mommy will be back soon, I promise." I signed back slowly, trying to make sure that I didn't make false promises. I still wasn't totally comfortable with her being anywhere near my daughter after what I had seen, but this wasn't as simple as my desires. Camille stared at me for a minute before sighing, giving me a nod and reaching her arms out for a hug. I held her as she silently wept into my shoulder. Over the next few months, Camille tried to understand that Mom wasn't coming back. The supervised visits never happened as Teresa kept no showing them, and no amount of furious voicemails I left seemed to do any good. The last straw was Camille's 10th birthday, 2 months after Teresa left. Watching Camille burst into tears on her birthday was the biggest gut punch that I could ever imagined, and I could do nothing to fix it. When calling her parents, I was met with obstinance and ignorance, spouting the exact same nonsense about the devil that their daughter had tried to impart onto Camille. Eventually, I got drunk and, against my better judgment, left yet another voicemail telling her, in not so kind words, that she had destroyed our daughter's trust in her irrevocably by trusting an imaginary friend over the life she had created that has tangible thoughts and feelings, and to take her shitty god and shove it up her ass. Not my proudest moment, I'll admit it, but there's only so many times you can see the mother of your child let her down. Teresa never returned my calls, and after that, Camille stopped asking about her. She regressed into her room, and I would even occasionally catch her trying to play pretend with the stuffed animals that she had in her room, signing to them as if they were her mom and telling them about her day. She found a coping mechanism, and while it was hard to see, I was happy for anything that helped her move past that. She still needed space, and I wanted to give her that. 10 years old was a tough time for her to see such a thing, and I needed to be supportive, not pushy. So when I prepared to leave for a conference in the next town, leaving her with the babysitter, she had asked to spend the day in her room, writing and watching TV until late. I didn't protest. Her babysitter, Brianna, was an ideal fit for Camille. Brianna was born deaf but had cochlear implants, meaning I could call her if I needed to, but she could sign perfectly with Camille. It was like the big sister that she had never had, and having her around pulled her out of her shell immensely. Brianna was a smart, kind young woman and seemed taken with Camille. Her father, Dale, was a good neighbor, and someone I knew I could trust if things ever took a turn. While I was still hesitant to leave, I at least knew that she would be in good hands. "Daddy, how much do you love me?" She signed to me as I got ready to go out of the door, more upset than usual. I kneeled down and I sighed back slowly. More than words can say. I smiled and got a grin in return, kissing her forehead before nodding to the babysitter, our neighbor's 18-year-old daughter. I'll be back the day after tomorrow. Camille won't be a bother, I promise. You have my number if you need anything. I handed the babysitter some money, with extra for pizza, and to begin my journey to the airport. It must have been around 4 a.m. when my phone began buzzing, with a FaceTime request from Camille. Exhausted but on instinct, I propped the phone up on my case and began signing as my eyes adjusted to the darkness. "Baby, it's very late. Is everything okay?" I signed, waiting in the pitch black silence for an answer. But none came. Instead, the sound of a light gurgling filled my ears, and it made my hair stand up on end. It sounded almost pained, like someone had ingested mouthwash and was struggling to lean their head forward to spit it out. I snapped awake and I stared at the black screen, but I could barely make out the shape moving in front of me, the pixels giving way as it flexed and bent around the screen. Fear beginning to grip me, I signed again as I heard a tapping along with the gurgling. "Camille, if you can see me, I need you to show me, or I'm going to have to call the police." I signed back, the tapping repeating the rhythm as the shape still moved. A car passed by the curtain to my daughter's room, and I saw what was dancing on the screen. My muscles cramped up and I reached for the phone by my bedside, immediately calling the babysitter. She was disheveled, almost emaciated, and looked nearly completely naked, save for a white ragged cloth covering her chest and hips. Her skin was ripped and wounds were openly bleeding down her body. Some were oozing black blood while others seeped as if they were pustules. Her face was almost completely obscured by thick matted hair that ran down her face and covered all but her mouth. Her head jerked in an upwards fashion. Her body moved in an unnatural way, the cadence of her taps coming from what I could only assume were the joints snapping around as she maneuvered in my daughter's bedroom. It was just a few seconds, but it'll stay with me for the rest of my life. No sooner had the image faded back into near darkness, the babysitter picked up the phone, sleepily answering. Mr. Watson, what is it?" "Brianna, someone is in the house. They're in Camille's room. I need you to go get your dad. He's got a gun and get him to go back into the house, now. I'm gonna call the police, okay?" There was a long pause, longer than I would have liked in that situation, before Brianna, now more alert, answered quickly. "Mr. Watson, Camille is asleep next to me on the couch. We watched movies all night. I'll get her up and I'll do what you say, okay?" The sounds of Brianna picking up Camille and taking her to the door filled me with some degree of relief. Over the next few minutes, she would find her dad and they would venture back over to the house, gun in hand. On my phone, I could still see the darkened shape moving and gurgling as I heard footsteps echoing up towards Camille's room. But as soon as they turned on the light, there was no figure dancing on the screen. Instead of relief, however, I felt dread, because there were two things in that room that set me on my journey home a day early, and began the waking nightmare that I live with to this day. The first were a series of drawings that had been ripped from a pink journal, and were scattered all over the floor, some stuck to the walls. While they weren't easy to make out on the phone, my neighbor Dale described some of them as drawings of a thin woman covered in sores, always in different poses in each photo, like a dance of sorts. The second was far more chilling and was the primary reason that I got straight into my car and I drove home. The window behind the dancing figure was broken. Glass was strewn across the yard, with the trail leading to the woods connected to our backyard. The next couple days were punctuated by concerned calls to family members, grateful talks with the neighbor, and angry voicemails left with the police after they said there wasn't much they could do beyond put locks on your windows and we'll patrol when we can. I sat down with Camille when things died down, and I tried to ask her about the journal, but she was unusually defensive and almost frightened to discuss whatever she had written in there. You know, whatever you wrote down, no matter how mean it is about me or Mom, I won't be upset. I signed to her, hoping to reassure her. I will understand if you're mad and need to say those things. But Camille didn't write negative things about either one of us. In fact, she didn't write anything at all about us. After a few minutes of silence, Camille looked around the living room and signed back shakily. She came to me 6 days after Mom left. She looked just like Mom but dirtier. She couldn't talk and she struggled to understand me when I signed, and so it took some time to understand each other. She began. Every sign held such hesitation, and I could do nothing but watch. Those first nights were short meetings. She would appear in the corner. Her legs would move weird and she would never walk anywhere. Always this kind of shuffle, I guess. She would get close to my bed. Her hand would reach out to touch my forehead, but she would stop and shuffle quickly to my window, pointing at the forest before making that sound and leaving. She looked at me almost shamefully as she stopped. I was still unsure what was going on and felt it better to hear her out entirely than to try to question everything at once. But after some time, she learned to sign in a different way, through her dancing. I would sign and she would respond with a dance move that I somehow understood. She said that she would watch me from the forest as I moved in. She felt my pain when my mom would yell at me, shake me, call me names. She wants to adopt me and be my new mommy. But she cast her gaze towards our backyard, the forest a few hundred yards away, now ancient, foreboding, and downright menacing rather than a welcoming sight of nature and solitude. Each tree rising like black spires, so closely clustered together that all light beyond the first 5 feet is totally gone. A black canvas filled with the eyes of untold creatures sat watching us as we watched them. I felt a strong sense of unease wash over me as I looked back to Camille, tapping her thigh as she continued to stare into the yard. But she asked me to do something that made me wonder if she was real, and that scared me. I told her to go away and she got angry. She started pulling at her skin, and her eyes grew wide and she stared beyond me, past me, and to the wall behind me. A gurgling sound filled the room as my eyes fixated on Camille, my instinct screaming at me not to turn around as we sat in the middle of my living room. But logic kept me centered as I had another concern mounting in my mind that I dared not share with her. That skin isn't her skin. She signed back slowly, deliberately, as she kept her eyes on whatever was behind me. Camille, look at me, honey. I promise you that she's not real. I tried to smile, but the situation was growing worse. Camille began shaking as her signs got faster, and her lip trembled. She came from the pit. She will return to the pit. With me. We will go to the land where the sun never shines. She finally looked at me and I saw the absolute terror in her face. I don't want to go, Daddy. I'm so sorry. She leapt up and ran to her room before I could stop her, slamming the door and sitting against it as I knocked, trying to get her to communicate. But without seeing her and being able to sign, It was pretty difficult. Baby, I just want to know that you're okay. 1 knock for yes, 2 for no, okay? There was 2 knocks. I frowned. I was beginning to worry the same issues that plagued her mother had begun to find their way into my daughter. For a while, I wasn't convinced that Teresa was well, and the bouts of mania, delusions of grandeur, and speaking with God culminated in a visit to a psychiatrist who confirmed my suspicions. Schizophrenia. I dared not tell Camille the truth, in part due to her age, and because the fear of it being passed on was all too real for me. But now, things were different. I need to finish our conversation. Can we do that soon? I asked, hoping that you would come around. A thump. It wasn't a knock, but I took it as a yes. Okay, I'll give you some space and I'll come back later. I love you more than words can say. Remember that. I went back downstairs and I tried to focus on next steps. I made some calls to friends asking for advice, and I settled on a meeting with a psychiatrist at the recommendation of her physician, hoping if we caught it early, it was treatable. It was a couple hours later, and I decided before I went to check on Camille that I would call her grandparents and at least inform them on what had happened so they could pass it on to Teresa, even if I didn't want her actively in Camille's life. However, when I tried calling, the phone simply dialed out whenever I tried, and I was unable to reach their inbox to even leave a message. Perplexed, I opened up my laptop and began to boot up Skype, hoping to get them somehow and provide an update. But as I booted it up, I saw that they weren't online. I sank back in my chair and I pinched the bridge of my nose in frustration. And then I noticed my Nest Cam app was working, and I was able to see a shadow from Camille's room. Something was moving out of view and I wasn't able to discern what, but it made me feel uneasy. I left the laptop open and I walked upstairs, knocking on her door. No answer. I could hear a faint series of taps and thuds as I sat in silence, waiting for some kind of reply from her. After a few moments, I caught glimpses of a shadow moving underneath the doorframe and I decided to look, hoping that it was just a case of Camille having her headphones in and not noticing me. I was instead greeted by the sight of my daughter bent over backwards, her palms and the soles of her feet facing inward, as her back kept clicking further and further inwards, her head snapping as it cracked further back, each finger and toe making a rhythmic tapping sound that faintly resembled a beat. Within a few moments, her body collapsed to the floor stomach first, her left foot now tapping incessantly as her leg lurched forward towards her face before the other joined it. The ligaments tearing as her top half slid underneath her legs and snapped up, contorting faster and more aggressively as she spun around the room. Outside of my view, I could hear her gurgling and a reciprocal tapping. Something was very, very wrong, and I knew that I had to get in there. Without a second thought, I began forcing my shoulder against the door, the wood buckling under the pressure but holding steady as I shouted her name. "Camille, stay there, baby. I'm coming. You'll be okay." With a thud lunged forward, the door gave way and I stumbled in. The drawings from her journal still scattered about the room, as the once repaired window was now wide open, the wind blowing while the trees leaned menacingly forward at its command. My daughter was gone. I called the police and informed them someone had taken my daughter away, possibly the same woman I saw the other night that my daughter said she befriended. "Do you have anyone in mind that you would go willingly with? Anyone that you trusted?" The detective asked me, tired but sympathetic eyes staring back at me. My mind thought back on the way Camille had behaved, the secrecy, talking to things that weren't there, and even the movements, I couldn't help but wonder. My wife, we separated because of how she was treating Camille, and she's not well. Mental health problems. I trailed off, almost feeling ashamed with myself for explaining it, as if this was still somehow my fault. The detective, to his credit, either didn't notice or didn't acknowledge it. I gave him an address and her family's details, assuring him that someone would know where she was. We will follow up with that immediately. Until then, I need you to stay here and wait. Sometimes when a child runs away, they turn up back home. If your wife did take her, there's still a chance she might drop her back home without issue. He leans in and puts a hand on my shoulder. We'll find your daughter. Don't worry. I spent the evening in a haze, staring out of my backyard and sipping a drink my wife had bought me last Christmas. I don't even taste it, but the numbing aspect helps forget the things that I've seen over the last few days. After a while, I go up to Camille's room and I figure that maybe reading her journal, though an invasion of privacy no dad should ever encroach on, would perhaps help me better understand what was going on in her mind. Before I can process everything I'm seeing, the laptop begins chiming downstairs. I head down to inspect and I see the caller ID. It's Teresa's parents. I frantically pick up and try to keep my words calm and to the point. Ella, Roy, Camille is gone. She's been taken. What? What do you mean she was taken? Did some pervert nab her in the night? My mother-in-law shrieks in the background, the panic obvious in her voice as my father-in-law begins to talk with her. No, Ella. I think Teresa took her. I don't think she's been taking her meds and she's clearly not looking after herself. Camille said that she had been talking to a new mommy that looked just like Teresa but dirtier. I've tried calling Teresa dozens of times over the past few months, and I never thought that she had just gone off the face of the earth. I couldn't even reach you for answers. What the hell is going on? I lose my cool, my face feeling hot and tears running down my face as those last words escape me. Where is my baby girl? There's a very long pause and I can hear discussion in the background before the phone is passed over to Roy, who speaks in a more concerned voice than I ever heard from him in the 17 years that I had known the man. Paul, Teresa was committed 60 days ago for trying to stab a postal worker. She thought that he was the devil in disguise, and that it was her duty to carry out God's will. She said that she had heard God talking to her through the toaster. He trailed off, the pain in his voice too sincere to be deception. We didn't tell you because, well, we didn't know how. We wanted to, honest we did. But letting our little Cammy know her mom had gone crazy it didn't sit right with us. We were hoping she would be better soon and this could go behind us. My hands were balling into fists, and I could feel the nails digging into my flesh so intensely that the blood was dripping down my fingers. We didn't want to ruin our chances of ever seeing our daughter again. You understand, don't you? No, Roy, I don't. My baby is out there with a stranger, and I just told the police it was the same person she thinks is her mom. Do you have any idea what this means? Now, we can talk about this later. What we need to do is focus on what... I slammed the laptop shut and immediately called the detective, leaving him a frantic voicemail as I step out to go to my neighbors, the cold night air hitting me in the face as I push forward. Dale, you got that automatic shotgun? I ask him, stone-faced and probably smelling of booze. Yeah, I do, Paul. You gotta let the detectives do their job. They can't do it quick enough. Trust me, Dale. I stare at him, knowing full well how bad this looks. I need the gun, now. Dale shuffles awkwardly on the porch step, taking in the situation in front of him. Paul, if they don't find anything tonight, I will go with you myself tomorrow. But for now, you need to wait. He looks at me with sympathy, hoping to quell my anger. Dale, what would you do if your freaking daughter was in the woods? I ask him coldly, not averting my eyes even when he looks away. He doesn't reply. He nods and steps into the house for a few minutes. I pace on the porch while I wait, seeing his daughter Brianna staring at me from the kitchen window. She walks around to speak to me. She's gone, isn't she? She asks, her voice cracking. I just nod, refusing to stop moving as I wait for Dale to get back. God, so she actually did it. I stop pacing, staring at her. Did what, Brianna? What did she do? I step forward, eyes now fixed on her face. What did she do? When you left, she went up to her room for a bit before bringing down the journal that she had been writing in. I was interested and I asked her about it. She asked me if I could keep a secret and I said yes. She showed me the journal and aside from the words, "New mom," it was just drawings of, well, it looked like her mom. But each photo showed a different pose and her skin got worse. Brianna rubbed her arms as she described it. With each drawing, she got bigger on the page. Her features became deformed and on the last one, Paul, I'm so sorry. What was it? Brianna, if you don't tell me, the police will ask you themselves. My heart was pounding in my chest. The last one was her, covered in blood. She was holding hands with a new mom in a dark pit, and above them, there was just a pile of blood and skin on the floor. She wrote something on the back of it, but I didn't see that. There was silence as Dale's footsteps came closer, and he handed me the shotgun. Paul, if I had known that this was real, I would have said something, I promise. She pleaded, tears raining down her face. I never imagined that she'd... God. I nod to Dale before rushing off back to the house, not saying a word to either of them. The house felt cold and desolate as I stepped inside, and I made my way to her room, trying to find the page Brianna had described. It took a bit of searching, but I came across it hanging above her bed. It was vile, her small frame devoid of all skin, and hiding in a deep black pit surrounded by trees, holding hands with the elongated figure of something so unnatural that I'd resist every urge not to rip it up the moment that I saw it. I gazed further down the page and I saw a pile of skin and blood displayed like a fresh kill, the black writing on the back seeping through and daring me to look. I take the page from the wall and I turn it over to read what it says, gun still gripped firmly in my hand. Here lies Daddy's skin. Then he can dance like us. Join us in the pit. Our new family. The gurgling sound returned, followed by a wet slurp sound in my kitchen as I raced downstairs, slipping on the floor as I turned the corner and my head colliding with the coffee table in a thunderous crash. My vision blurred and my head thumping. I see a shape dancing unnaturally towards me, limbs crunching, torso twisting, as the innumerable gurgles and clicks fill my ears until it's deafening. I shut my eyes out of pain and I feel it rear up close to me, grabbing my face with two appendages and pulling it close, its lips touching my forehead, before it utters 5 words that shatter my soul beyond repair, each one accompanied by a shuffle as it gets farther away from me. More than words can say. When I woke up, I was being tended to outside by police and paramedics. Tape strewn all across my property as thick black bags were taken by men and women in hazmat outfits. Everybody looked at me with such sympathy. I didn't need to ask why. They said it was most likely a bear attack, that maybe Camille had gotten lost in the woods, attacked by the bear on the way back and ripped to pieces as it tried to find more food here. Her beautiful hair and the still detached scalp being the main identifier. They were convinced and offered me condolences as they wrapped things up. But I knew better. I still do. I know that there's something in those woods that takes the form of something it knows it can prey upon. It wears the skin of a loved one to lure you in, but whatever is underneath, it's something I never wish to understand. It's been 6 months and it still gurgles to me every night, beckoning me from the entrance to the woods. Sometimes I'll look out on a long evening, a bottle of rum in hand, and see two shapes dancing from afar, too distant to make out features, but I know it's them. I know it didn't want to be her mother. My family have been calling regularly, as have the neighbors, but I don't answer anymore. I know what's waiting for me now. I know that they will eventually get bolder and take me when I'm vulnerable. But I still have this shotgun, and I've decided when I pass this on to you, I'm going to go into the woods and let fate decide what happens to me. Madam Lockwood, these creatures are real, and they prey upon people who have lost someone dear to them. They live in the deepest parts of the woods, and I still don't know what they want. But I do know that they are beyond anything we could ever understand or beat. It wants my skin. I just might let it have it if I can see my daughter again. Even if it is to put whatever lurks in those woods back into the pit they came from.